It was an angry, fist-swinging exit. Boris Johnson attacked the Privileges Committee, which he learnt yesterday had judged him guilty of willfully misleading Parliament over lockdown parties. It had been a kangaroo court, he said. He'd been the victim of a witch hunt by anti-Brexiteers. And he took swipes at Rishi Sunak. He'd passively abandoned or junked Boris Johnson's most important policies.
The statement yesterday was straight out of the Donald Trump playbook. There was zero contrition and a load of conspiracy theories and untruths.
3 of those honoured in Boris Johnson's resignation honours list were amongst those supporting him. Former Home Secretary, now Dame Priti Patel, tweeted Parliament had lost a political titan. Tory MP, now Dame Andrea Jenkyns, called it a bad day for democracy. And newly honoured Sir Michael Fabricant said disgraceful treatment had been meted out to Boris Johnson.
In the last few months.
9 months after he was ejected from number 10, Boris Johnson has forced a by-election on Rishi Sunak. And 2 of his closest followers, Nadine Dorries and today Nigel Adams, have done the same. Both were denied peerages, which Boris Johnson wanted to hand them. One minister couldn't be sure their resignations weren't a deliberate, coordinated attempt to destabilise Rishi Sunak.
Your party now faces 2 by-elections in England, unwanted by-elections. Was this a deliberate attempt, do you think, by Mr Johnson, by Nadine Dorries, to damage Rishi Sunak?
Look, I don't know. All I know is that we're going into those by-elections with determination to fight them. We'll be putting up good local candidates.
I'm going now, so there's no point hanging around today.
Whips have been ringing round MPs to see if others might follow Nadine Dorries and Nigel Adams, forcing unwelcome by-elections on Rishi Sunak. He'd been hoping to be still basking in the aura of what he judged a very successful trip to the United States.
Rishi Sunak.
Instead, Rishi Sunak's dealing with a dramatic plot twist in the Tory psychodrama he boasted he'd axed.
Our economy is in much better shape. Our politics doesn't feel like a box set drama anymore.
The evidence I shall give for this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
The Privileges Committee judged he did nothing of the sort. By quitting the moment he read their draft report, Boris Johnson has skipped a Commons vote and a potential by-election in which he could have been re-elected.
He could have taken this to the House of Commons. He could have taken it to his own electorate. And the fact that he hasn't done so, I think, tells you everything you need to know, which is that he thought he would lose. So he's chickened out and run away and tried to protect the narrative of Boris Johnson, the winner.
It's fantastic to be back in Singapore, talking to this group of blockchain pioneers.
Some of Boris Johnson's old allies believe his focus had already switched from Parliament to the lucrative international lecture circuit.
It's so good to be back in Nigeria. After an enforced absence, I had to be Prime Minister for a long time.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. A quick response from Mr Corbyn.
With what Mr Johnson
The 2 main party leaders who battled out the last general election, both now complaining they've been banished by their parties. Another chapter in our volatile post-Brexit politics, but maybe not the closing one.
Well, Gary's here now. A lot of people are having a wonderful weekend in this weather, but I'm suspecting not the Prime Minister.
A bit less so, yes. These by-elections like torpedoes aimed at his battleship, and whips have been busily ringing around other potential MPs who might, just because of their loyalty to Boris Johnson, their wish to destabilise Rishi Sunak, general disgruntlement might just add to the number of by-elections. They haven't found any yet, as far as we know. And I think in number 10 they think there is a way of getting through this. You have the by-elections just before the summer recess, just before the tea room's empty, MPs can't swirl around and gossip with each other so much, and you roll the pitch beforehand. And they also say it could have been worse. If Boris Johnson had decided to fight this out, the judgment that is coming his way from the Privileges Committee, and there'd been a vote on the floor of the House of Commons, he would have lost it, but Tory constituency associations might have been piling in, trying to get their MP to back Boris Johnson. The pressures, the tensions would have been there, and the whole thing would have dragged on for longer. So grim, but could have been grimmer.
And what's Boris Johnson plotting right now, do you think?
Well, it's unusual. He always leaves himself wriggle room. That's what he's famous for. And I know he was talking at one point to trusted aides about the idea of standing in Henley, his old seat, and maybe a deal could be cut. But he's always sort of plotting these things. It doesn't mean he's necessarily going to do them. That statement last night destroyed so many bridges that he looks like, for once, he hasn't given himself a lot of wriggle room. He looks like a man who is going off onto the lecture circuit. He's going to produce a memoir that makes Margaret Thatcher's look like a Mills and Boone, I suspect. And one other thing that's really important about today and the Privileges Committee report we're going to get out on Monday, this was a bunch of MPs, backbench MPs, who turned on a Prime Minister. He'd been Prime Minister only recently, months, nearly come back 7 months ago, and they turned on him and have effectively, he would say, thrown him out of Parliament. There's a whiff of the 17th century about that.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Well, so a by-election and a new MP awaits for the people of Uxbridge and South Ruislip in West London. Our senior political correspondent, Paul McNamara, is there now. Paul, what are the voters saying to you?
Well, this may not surprise you, given it's Boris Johnson that we're talking about here, but this is a by-election where people really do have opinions. Often when a by-election takes place, some people don't even know it's happening. Here, though, just walking about, I've walked past cafes, I've walked past restaurants, and people are talking about it. You overhear people, they have an opinion on this. Now, all of this has happened so suddenly. Actually, the polling there's not too much polling on this seat in particular. The most recent one was by Lord Ashcroft. It suggested that Boris Johnson could win this seat if there was a by-election. But it won't be Boris Johnson running in this by-election. Throw in yet another bad headline for the Conservatives, for Boris Johnson. Throw in an unknown candidate who doesn't have the star power of Boris Johnson. And then look at Boris Johnson's majority was only 7,000 last time round. All of a sudden you can see why Labour are looking a lot more confident.
Labour are on the march in a place where one of the biggest beasts in not just Conservative but British politics used to roam. Among their supporters and some on the streets of Uxbridge, Boris Johnson's resignation is cause for celebration.
I'm ecstatic, so I'm going to hope for some change in this area.
That's what I've written to him this morning.
Have you?
Yes.
What did you say in that letter?
I said it's a shame you haven't got a hint or even a little tiny bit of humility to apologise or acknowledge what you've done to this.
So his resignation letter didn't go down well with you?
Oh, I'm delighted.
He's gone, so we'll get a new MP.
What do you think your chances are that that new MP is going to be Labour?
It's got to be. In my view, it's got to be Labour. So we shall see.
Feeling pretty confident?
I am very confident.
Have you ever voted Conservative in the past?
Yes.
Did you vote for Boris in the past?
Yes.
And how are you feeling now?
Heartbroken, because I was lied to about Brexit, and I voted for Brexit, and then I was lied to. So I'm a.
And you pin that on Boris?
I put it on Boris. Not
he would say
Boris.
he never lied to you about it.
But then what did he advertise on the bus? Where's that money then? Why?
A by-election is coming to Uxbridge and South Ruislip. The Labour candidate, Danny Beales, is a local and the mood is confident.
Well, look, we're in good heart. We've got a fantastic candidate in Danny Beales and we're going to be fighting.
You must be over the moon that he's not going to be facing Boris Johnson.
Well, we'll take on any Tory. I'm not scared of any Tory anywhere in this country. We are fighting to win.
But Conservative support still runs deep in this part of West London, as does affection for Boris Johnson himself.
He was a good local servant.
So you gutted to see him go?
I am, yes. I think he was reasonably stable. Again,
you thought he was reasonably stable, because that would be the one big criticism that most people say against him.
I think as a PM, he was one of the worst in our history. I'm a doctor by training, so during the whole COVID scandal, the mishandling, the breaking government guidelines, I think that really put a sour taste in our mouth.
So you voted for Boris in the past?
I have.
Would you have voted for him again?
Oh, I dare so if he come up again. I mean, the man's an idiot, but he's a likeable idiot.
Would you vote Conservative now, even if it isn't Boris Johnson that you'd be voting for?
Yes, sir. That's because I wouldn't have the other lot.
What do you think about this, about him leaving? He's leaving you. He's leaving Uxbridge.
I know, I'm gutted.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you think's behind it? Do you think it's a witch hunt?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Really?
I've got to go for a massage. Bye.
Enjoy it.
For some, though, Boris Johnson wasn't the election winner he's lauded to be. This could be a resignation that actually helps Rishi Sunak.
You've just lost your local MP. How do you feel about it?
Oh, very good. I think it is good that he's gone.
So I take it you weren't a Boris supporter beforehand?
No, I wasn't, no.
OK, might you vote for someone who isn't Boris Johnson if they were a Conservative?
Potentially.
Potentially. Or potentially for the Conservatives, Uxbridge is the end of the line.
Paul
Paul McNamara there, reporting from Uxbridge. Well, earlier I spoke to the Conservative Member of Parliament and former Cabinet Minister Sir John Redwood, who's a long-standing supporter of Boris Johnson. And I began by asking him whether these by-elections are a good idea for the Tory party.
I think they're very unhelpful to the leadership and to the party. And I urgently want to hear from our Prime Minister. I think he needs to unify us. He needs to explain to my colleagues who are very angry and very unhappy at the moment what the mission is and how they are a welcome part of the team on the journey. And clearly too many don't feel that, which is why we've had 3 resignations already.
Are we witnessing the Tory party tearing itself to pieces?
Well, I hope not. 3 resignations is not good in such a short space of time. Clearly, at the moment, there are forces within the party that do not believe that enough Conservative solutions are being applied and feel that too many Conservative policies, which previous governments had embarked on, have now been jettisoned without good replacements. I mean, we want to get back to that tax-cutting, pro-enterprise, pro-freedom agenda. We want more of the Brexit wins. That is what Boris was saying in his statement. And I hope the Prime Minister is listening, and the sooner he reassures more people, the better.
You talk about the need for unity in the party, and you're trying to stop people from tearing each other to pieces. But the person throwing the biggest stones at the moment is Boris Johnson in his blistering resignation letter yesterday.
Again, I'm not in the business of ascribing blame. But what has happened has happened. Boris obviously felt extremely unhappy about the way he was being treated by Conservative people on the Privileges Committee as well as others. I have no idea what the rights and wrongs of the Privileges Committee dispute is, because we haven't seen the papers, and there won't now be a debate and a vote in the way that there would normally be on these matters. But clearly, Boris had wider concerns about the government, which he decided to express. That has to be dealt with. You can't ignore it.
Are you going to resign from your seat, triggering a by-election?
Of course I'm not. What a silly question.
Well, I mean, if I'd asked Nigel Adams that 2 days ago, he might have said the same. Or Nadine Dorries, or indeed Boris Johnson.
Well, you have to know the people you're dealing with. No, I'm not about to resign my parliamentary seat.
Do you see Boris Johnson, or do you want Boris Johnson to come back as leader of your party?
Well, that again is a very speculative question. The truth is that to lead the Conservative Party, you need to be a Conservative MP. Boris Johnson, as from today, is not a Conservative MP, so it's not a question for the immediate future.
But would you like to see him stand in one of these by-elections, for instance, in the seat that was vacated by Nadine Dorries?
Boris Johnson will do what Boris Johnson wants to do. I'm not a Boris Johnson advisor.
John Redwood, thank you very much. Well, joining me now is Lord Heseltine, a grandee of the Tory party and a former Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you very much for coming on our programme on a Saturday evening. Let me start with this question then. I mean, George Osborne, the former Chancellor, tweeted yesterday when he heard of Boris Johnson's resignation from Parliament, lovely. The fact that someone like that can say lovely to the resignation of Boris Johnson, it shows you that the Tory party, as a coherent political animal, well, you know, it's falling apart, isn't it?
Well, I didn't see what George said, and there must have been more than just that. But as a sort of student of politics, what has happened is brilliant. It is the most manipulative use of public opinion that I have seen for a long time. Boris Johnson, 2 days ago, was facing censure from a select committee of the House of Commons. The possibility of the House of Commons itself supporting that censure, of a recall by his constituents, a by-election which he lost, public humiliation, all against the background that he lied to the House of Commons. And yet, in this extraordinary coup d'etat, we are now having a great examination of the future of the Tory party, of the Brexit issue, of Boris as a candidate, and the possibility of by-elections. What an incredible achievement to change the public debate from lying to the House of Commons, in which he would have been seriously embarrassed, to one in which he is now the source of discussion as to whether he's coming back or dividing the party. And this is Boris at his most typical. He is unprincipled, dishonest. He will say whatever he needs to do to win the argument at the moment. And this, to me, is the huge tragedy of Brexit, because that is the biggest historic mistake that any government has made in 50 years, and Boris used these techniques to achieve it.
OK, but can the Tory party survive the spectre, the ghost of Boris Johnson?
Of course. The Tory party is the most successful political force in the history of democracy.
It doesn't look like that right now, Lord Heseltine.
You're quite right. There have been bad moments before. But the party has a remarkable skill in regrouping on the centre ground of politics and winning elections. Now, I happen to think that Rishi Sunak had a hand which was extremely difficult to play. And he has brought sanity back to the conduct of affairs. It is a very difficult situation he faces. And these by-elections, which again, a remarkable change of fortune. We're now discussing not lying to the Commons, but whether the Tories can win by-elections. I suspect it'll be a mixed picture. No one knows. But it is not a definitive moment because the general election is not to next year.
Yeah.
And although it will be extremely difficult to pull back from where the polls are at the moment, I don't yet think the Labour Party are in a position where they can count on an overall majority in the Commons.
OK. Although the polls are massively in their favour and have been consistently. Very briefly, Lord Heseltine, what are the parallels here between Donald Trump, also fighting for a comeback, and Boris Johnson?
The lack of integrity of the two people, the ruthless exploitation of populism, the dishonesty of the campaign, the disregard to the damage they're doing to their country. It's tragic to me that people of that sort ever got elected in parliamentary democracies, and it has undoubtedly contributed to a sense of despair, particularly amongst the younger generation, who have seen, in this country anyway, their future as a major player in Europe, prejudiced by the distortions of the Brexit campaign.
OK, got to leave it there. You're not holding back. Lord Heseltine, thank you very much indeed.